Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of geopolitical and economic analysis. We are looking at a massive, glaring contradiction sitting right at the very heart of the global financial system. It's known as the UAE gold paradox. Now, this whole web of wealth, power, and human cost is definitely intricate, but we're going to break down exactly how it operates step by step. So let's get into it. All right, to start things off, let's look at a number that perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about: 0. The United Arab Emirates, which, as we know, is an incredibly wealthy, oil-rich desert nation, actually mines absolutely zero gold of its own. There's no hidden, secret seam of precious metal sitting under the sand out there. They produce practically none of it domestically. 0.
But you have to contrast that absolute zero with this massive reality. Despite mining nothing, roughly 14% of the global share of traded gold passes directly through Dubai. To put that into perspective, that is literally 1 in every 7 bars of gold traded globally. According to the source's analysis of Dubai's own trade figures, in 2024 alone, that amounted to a staggering $186 billion worth of gold flowing right through their infrastructure. That's huge.
Which brings us to the central mystery we're unpacking today. You gotta ask yourself, why is an oil-rich nation so obsessed with gold? Well, to understand the sheer scale of this paradox, our source takes us on a journey. We really have to follow the metal itself, all the way from the dusty mines of Africa to the pristine vaults of Europe, just to see what the UAE is actually getting out of this massive exchange.
Section 1. Tracing the supply chain.
And this journey begins with a pretty grim reality: 430,000. According to research cited in our source, that's the estimated number of people in Burkina Faso alone who are pulling this gold from the earth completely by hand. We're talking about men and boys digging in unregulated pits, using highly toxic mercury to separate the gold from the rock. They're literally poisoning themselves in the process, and it's all for just a few dollars a day. There are no registered companies out there, and definitely no official records.
So how does all this unrecorded gold actually move up the chain? Well, step 1. Whoever controls the ground takes their cut. In places like Darfur in Sudan, the source notes that this means gold is taxed by militias, like the RSF, which actively funds insurgencies and civil wars. Step 2. The gold gets consolidated. It moves from local buyers to major regional hubs, places like Bamako in Mali or Lomé in Togo. And here, gold from all across West Africa is just mixed together. So suddenly, absolutely nobody can trace it back to a specific pit or a specific warlord. Finally, step 3. It's exported to Dubai, armed with fresh, seemingly legitimate paperwork.
And honestly, this next stat brilliantly illustrates the utter absurdity of this whole system. In 2024, Togo exported around $4 billion of gold to the UAE. The catch? Togo barely mines any gold of its own. The source highlights this massive discrepancy as clear, undeniable proof of the system at work. That $4 billion represents gold smuggled over the border from other countries, newly stamped in Togo, acquiring murky but just passable enough papers right before it flies out to the Middle East.
Section 2. The ultimate financial laundromat. Now, the crucial point here relies on this brilliant analogy from the source material. Think about it. If you try to launder cash, well, paper bills retain their serial numbers, right? Digital money, that leaves a highly traceable digital paper trail. But melted gold, that's a completely different story. Dubai's refineries can take gold from a legitimate corporate mine, mix it in a crucible with gold dug up by a militia, and melt it all down into one standardized bar. Once that metal turns to liquid, all its origins and its entire history are completely erased. There is literally no scientific test on Earth that can tell you which gram came from a corporate mine and which came from a warlord's pit. It is, essentially, flawless laundering.
Remember that $186 billion figure from earlier? Here's the twist. The UAE doesn't actually own that gold. They operate more like a town's lone pawn shop. They just take a small refining and trading fee off everyone who walks through their door. But that small fee, it drags massive, incredibly lucrative industries right behind it. I mean, to process the world's gold, you have to build high-tech vaults for storage. That requires heavy shipping and massive security operations, which of course brings in the global insurers, and suddenly all the major international banks set up shop. The source points out that this sprawling gold infrastructure is the very foundation that turned Dubai into the globally trusted financial and logistical center we know today.
Section 3. The geopolitical escape hatch.
Now, according to the source, the real prize here isn't just the money, it's massive global leverage.
Unlike money in a bank account, which, can be suspended, frozen, or sanctioned with just the click of a button, gold is a physical lump of metal. You can load it onto a plane, fly it to a willing buyer, and turn it into cold, hard cash. Absolutely no Western bank can block it. And this transforms the UAE into the ultimate escape hatch for sanctioned nations, dictators, and militias who find themselves entirely cut off from the Western financial system.
And here's where we really start to see the geopolitical payoff. Think of the UAE as the one kid in school who lends money to everyone, but always expects a huge favor in return. When the RSF in Sudan needs to sell gold to fund their military operations, the UAE cleans it, and in return, they secure fertile farmland and mercenaries. When Somaliland needs a financial patron, the UAE steps up and gets strategic Red Sea ports out of the deal. When Sahel states face heavy sanctions after a coup, the UAE steps right in and secures access to rare earth minerals. They are literally using the gold market to buy geopolitical influence.
And they lock in this leverage using business structures like BOOT. That stands for Build, Own, Operate, Transfer. The source highlights how the UAE uses its gold leverage to secure these incredibly one-sided deals, like for example building power plants in Burkina Faso. An Emirati company comes in, builds the plant, owns it, and extracts the profits from it for decades. This literally forces the local population to buy their own electricity back from a foreign power. The source notes the bitter irony here, right? Local leaders in these nations will often preach strict sovereignty and anti-colonialism to their people, only to then turn around and sign away their critical infrastructure to a Gulf state.
Section 4.
The global complicity.
Because guess what? The ultimate destination for all this freshly cleaned gold, it isn't just sitting in a vault in Dubai. No, it enters the mainstream market. It ends up in pristine Swiss refineries, ultra-secure London vaults, and highly respectable Western investment funds. The source points out that global watchdog organizations like the FATF and the OECD have been flagging this shadowy trade for years. Yet Western markets just happily continue to buy up this completely untraceable metal.
And to really understand why this continues, the source impartially observes some critical context about the UAE itself. We are talking about a nation with a domestic population of just 1.5 million citizens. Its security is essentially guaranteed by American military bases located on its soil, and its currency is strictly pegged to the US dollar. The source suggests a very pragmatic reality here. The UAE plays this role as the global laundromat simply because the broader global system allows it to. Why? Because everyone up the chain is taking a cut.
Section 5. The true human cost.
The source uses a deeply powerful framing to describe the reality of this supply chain on the ground. They state, everyone has heard of blood diamonds, but this is blood gold. By acting as a willing buyer with absolutely no questions asked, this financial system directly helps tear nations apart. It's actively funding the very warlords and factions responsible for violence, civil wars, and atrocities all across the African continent.
Furthermore, the creator of the source material approaches this from a very specific moral and religious critique. They point out that much of this gold originates from Muslim-majority lands in Africa, only to flow directly into an already wealthy Gulf state. The source frames this system as a profound betrayal of trust. They argue that this vast natural wealth should be treated as a trust to build schools, hospitals, and local industries to actually uplift the poorest populations. Instead, it's being hoarded by warlords and washed by foreign states who are just taking their cut.
Which really leaves us with this final provocative thought. We've seen exactly how the supply chain works, how the flawless laundering is achieved, and the massive, untouchable geopolitical leverage it creates. But if this wealth is truly meant to be a resource for the people who actually live on that land, when will the global system stop funneling it from the poorest hands into the absolute richest vaults? It's a question that challenges the very foundations of global trade as we know it. Hopefully this explainer has given you a much clearer lens to view all of this through. Keep learning, keep questioning everything, and thanks for joining me on this deep dive.